My friends, I want to talk to you today very simply about government.
We need to use diplomacy and build international consensus to resolve our problems whenever possible.
Our diplomats are working with a range of partners to strengthen human rights protections.
This is not a time to undercut our diplomats.
Welcome to Diplomatic Immunity. My name is Alistair Somerville at the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University. This week we wanted to bring you some thoughts from another inspirational diplomat from the US Foreign Service. As part of ISD's Diverse Diplomacy Leaders speaker series, US civil servants and Foreign Service officers from diverse backgrounds share their experiences in conversation with ISD fellows. We're about to hear highlights from a conversation between ISD fellow Heera Kamboj, herself a Foreign Service officer, and Mirembe Nantongo. Mirembe Nantongo recently retired from the Foreign Service, and until last year she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Global Talent Management, where the issue of diversity within the Foreign Service was a central part of her work. She is of Ugandan and Dutch parentage and first worked for the State Department as a locally employed staff member at the US Embassy in Kampala before joining the Foreign Service in 1995. She served and lived in Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, and Washington, D.C. In the conversation, she offered insights on her Foreign Service career, her work on diversity and inclusion, and offered advice for a successful career in foreign policy. As always, get in touch with ISD by sending an email to diplomacy@georgetown.edu or reach out to us on Twitter @GUDiplomacy. You can watch more videos from the Diverse Diplomacy series on our YouTube channel or on our dedicated website, diversediplomacy.com. Let's have a listen to the conversation.
Hi, Mirembe.
Good morning, Heera. Good morning, everyone. It's terrific to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
One of our favorite questions that I want to get started with this morning is, you've had a very unique and very successful career trajectory. What initially attracted you to diplomacy, and what steps or what process led you to decide on this as your career? What is your origin story?
Yeah, okay. It's not like it was a plan that I sort of laid out over the years. So let me just quickly, as you say, give you the origin story. Let's see. I was born. My father is Ugandan. My mother is Dutch. I spent most of my childhood in Uganda, between Uganda and Holland, visiting my mom's relatives. And then I went to school, high school in England and university in England as well. Coming out of that, I returned to Uganda, looking for work, wanting to contribute, and ended up working at the US Embassy, which is where I spent a year as a locally engaged staff member, which was a tremendous period in my life. I really enjoyed it. And then I followed my husband to the to the United States as an EFM, and my son was born. And then we went to Latin America. We went to Panama. And while I was working in Panama, I actually did a stint as a contractor. I forgot to put that in my bio. So as well as locally engaged staff EFM, I do have contractor with the State Department background. And then I got to your question about what made you decide. I got to the point where, how as an EFM, you go to cocktail parties, you're always among, people who are working in one capacity or another with the embassy. And there was always this question, what do you do? And I always had to say, my husband, and my husband. And eventually, I got tired of having that same response. And I thought, I'm sure I could do this as well. And that's when I started getting interested in the Foreign Service exam process. And so I took the exam and got in and joined the Foreign Service as a generalist in 1995. So it was not planned. There was nothing deliberate about it, but it's been a fantastic career. I'm so glad it worked out that way.
Thank you so much for sharing, all of the different ways you've worked for the department. I think that's really great for students who are on this in this virtual event today to see that there's many ways to serve and work with the Department of State. So, following on that, how do you see yourself and how do you think others see you within the foreign affairs world? What ways do you identify and how do you think that has shaped your approach to your work and others' approach to you?
Yeah, you're right to make the distinction between how do I see myself and how do I think others see me. They're closely related, but they're not necessarily the same thing. I think a key thing for me, and this applies to the Foreign Service, but just sort of in life in general, is that I feel that I've always been kind of at the intersection. So, with my dual parentage, with the two very, very different cultures that are mixed in me, and the fact of, in both countries, in Uganda and Holland, you have a very clear majority population, and you kind of never really fit in with either in any way. Not that anything was negative about that, but there was always that sense of being different. And then, as a Foreign Service employee in the different categories, you always felt that, that there's a different universe there's a different universe there. So I think being on the intersection, being always aware that the perspective that you bring to the table is obviously not necessarily the only one, but sort of the ability to see both or many different perspectives, and not to sort of question their validity, their authenticity, and just to accept that you have to walk this line, you have to find yourself and be able to contribute at the same time, even as you're working along this kind of intersectionality, if you like. One of the really interesting elements of my experience as an immigrant was, you're coming into the United States with that sense of, okay, this is one side of my background, this is the other, and I love them both, they're great both, but I don't really fit in. Coming here to the United States, where people coalesce around ideals, where it's, the nation is very much around a nation of around principles, around more abstract things. And so coming here, I remember this very distinctly, that sort of feeling of I guess relief, where, oh wow, look at how many different elements, cultural and heritage, go into making up America, where you don't necessarily have to say, well, the reason I'm in this place and I look so different or I sound so different is because blah, 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 blah. The Americans look like everybody, right? Anybody in the world. And so that was a huge relief. And I think that it is something that really has served me in my career. Another thing about coming to the United States is that, right, so you come, it's the ideals, and you coalesce around the ideals, and that's really, really attractive. When you come in, though, from the outside and you weren't born there, you don't have the history, you have to play a certain amount of catch up in terms of the people, the geography, the physicalness of the country, all the different cultures that go in. And that's been a lifelong journey. I mean, you go overseas and you try to understand countries and cultures overseas, but there is a huge amount of work in that regard to do here as well. And it's an ongoing process. It's never going to end, but I've loved it. And I feel that I've expanded as a person, but just become more useful in general because, that sort of learning curve that I had to go through as an immigrant.
Yes, in my own A100, we had somebody who was considered maybe a new American, and it was wonderful to sit right next to her and take that oath together. So thank you for sharing that story. Do you think that the interlocutors in the countries that you met, were they very attracted to your story, or they found that interesting? And did that say something about you? Did they seem more receptive? Would love to hear a little bit about that if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, I think there's experiences on both sides. People, again, you as a Foreign Service officer, you go out and you are the face, for the interaction that you're having, you're the face of the United States. And very, very often, you had people who were sort of like, wow, how could this happen, sort of a thing, which could have a negative side, but it also does, in my head, always had the positive side of sending a very clear message from the United States that, hello, we look like many, many things, we sound like many, many things, but each of those elements are part of us. I guess on the more negative side, and this is something that we dealt with in while I was working at within diversity and inclusion at the State Department, is that phenomenon, that syndrome of being an American abroad who doesn't look like what other people expect an American to look like or sound like. So we called it, I want to speak to a real American phenomenon. And so that was fairly frequent, and you had to figure out how you were going to engage with that, where people second guess your credibility because you don't look or sound like what they thought you should look and sound like. And it's, it can be very hurtful. It can be very sort of, makes people feel isolated. And so one of the things that we constantly emphasize in these conversations is the importance of connecting with each other, people in the same situation, making leadership aware of the need that you have this phenomenon, which, it's neither good or bad in itself, but it does exist and it can have negative consequences for your people. So, connecting with people who are in the same boat, making sure the leadership is in the conversation, and, coming up with collective strategies and mutual support to make it a phenomenon that brings the most positive to the table. Because, as I said, I think it really does bring a lot of positives to the table in terms of what it is, the messages that we're trying to convey in throughout the world.
That answer really resonates with me about, wanting to talk to the real American, but in and of itself, it shows why the importance of having a truly representative foreign service is so important. You prove it by being there.
Exactly.
Our next question is, how has the foreign affairs community approach to a diverse and inclusive workforce changed over the course of the last 25 years in your career?
Very much. When I first came on board, it really wasn't a conversation. I remember when I passed my oral, everybody remembers that who's a generalist, when you pass the oral and they tell you that right there and then, we're going to offer you the job. I do remember that I did have a moment with one of the other candidates who didn't get through, who was like, "Oh, you only got in because you are a female minority." So that was that was not a great way to start the whole thing. But in general, in terms of a narrative within the State Department, a deliberate focus in the State Department on diversity and inclusion, it may have been going on, but it's not something that I was aware of for quite a while in my career. It's only more recently that awareness has built in the State Department as well as in the nation writ large. And I think that, I left in July, so I don't know what's been happening since then, but I was so heartened by, the speed and the energy and the hunger that comes from the people to participate and really, how are we going to make a difference here? And there were a couple of things that I saw that I had not seen, earlier in my career, which is an understanding that diversity and inclusion has so many different elements that go into it, right? I mean, you cannot, if you could write a list all day and still not be done with all the things in the work environment that go into diversity and inclusion, whether you're talking recruitment, whether you're talking promotion, whether you're talking performance management, whatever you're talking about, there's always an element that somehow affects diversity and inclusion. So what I really enjoyed seeing in the State Department was putting a single lens on all of these processes, right? Bringing them all together and saying, right, this is the lens, diversity and inclusion. Let's look at recruitment, let's look at promotion, let's look at performance management, which is exactly what you need to do. And then the way the narrative has changed is that there has always been a focus on numbers, right? You've seen this. I mean, this is not just the State Department, it's all federal agencies, it's the nation, if you like. These are the numbers, and this shows where you are in terms of representation, and look how terrible these numbers are, what has been going on. And certainly when you think about how much time there has been to make progress, there hasn't been as much as any of us would like. But that focus on the numbers, I think, really limited the conversation and limited the field for action. And so one of the things in my last couple of years was I saw, and this was really the DG, Carol Perez's, her focus is a focus on the inclusion piece of the dynamic. Because inclusion is not necessarily about, let's write a bunch of regulations, let's generate more numbers. It's more about, what is the culture? How do people interact with each other? How do they feel their place in the organization? What awareness do they have of what their actions, the impact of their daily actions. What are the expectations we need to set for leadership at all levels, because we're all leaders at all levels? And how do we shift the culture? And I think this has been, as I said, one of the most heartening things that I've seen, that it hasn't moved away from numbers, but the focus has expanded to include, this is a cultural matter. This is about people to people. This is about how we all behave minute to minute, hour to hour. And just making it a much broader thing, making it much more participatory and much more comprehensive, to get the understanding across that this is not something that you can do. You can't just say, we are going to be more diverse and inclusion and put this in the FAM. You know, there's many things that need to go into it, and it's a slow game. It's not something that's going to happen, you know, from one day to the next. But I think that, and it's not just the State Department, it's everything that has been happening outside as well. It's the nation as well, and it's all kind of coming together in this this hunger and this passion to make a change. And I found that extremely heartening. I will say that one of the things that worries me a little bit, and again, I say the State Department, but I also mean the nation writ large, is that, you know, if you think about it, it's a continuum, right? On the one hand, you know, people are saying like, we need to do everything and punish everybody and throw everyone in jail. And it's just the only thing that matters is, you know, getting the job done in terms of diversity and inclusion. And then on the other hand, on the other end of the continuum, we have people who are more, what is this all about? You know, we're supposed to be treating everybody equally. Why are we setting, you know, so you have this spread of opinion in the narrative, in the debate. And in any debate where you have these kind of polls, it's really important to have people on both sides, right, at either end of the poll. But where you end up in terms of policy always has to be some kind of a, I guess, a compromise, some kind of a middle ground that brings everybody in. And one of the things that I worried about a little, and I still continue to worry about it, again, not just about the State Department, but writ large, is that when the power equation, if you like, swings to one end of the continuum, then you risk losing the people who are on the further end of it. And so the narrative becomes, you know, very much the kind of narrative that we always have when we're like, you know, talking to the choir, where the choir talking to the choir, we make assumptions about, you know, what is the right thing and this is the way it should be. And then you have people in the room who are not necessarily, you know, they don't necessarily subscribe in the way that we do. And so then they feel left out and they feel unheard. And then you create another problem that undermines the whole purpose of being diverse and inclusive. So I do worry about paying attention to the narrative and making sure that as we have these discussions, we're not making these basic assumptions that are going to drive people away. You know, we're not voicing basic assumptions that we share with maybe most of the people in the room, but, you know, not all of them. And so there's other people, they'd feel, oh, they can't say anything, and then they go away and then they feel unheard. And that becomes a collective problem. But yeah, it feels good to see where we are now. And I look forward to see what's going to, you know, come next.
Yeah, spoken like a true diplomat. We need to be inclusive in inclusion. So even in pursuit of that. So thank you for sharing that. One question that I personally am very interested in is, can you tell us a little bit about one of your champions or mentors, as we call them, maybe sponsors, going beyond mentorship? How do they influence your career, and how have you paid this forward in your own career to those coming up behind you?
Oh my goodness, I don't even really know where to start in terms of, you know, who the mentors and the champions are. You have so many big names at the State Department who really, you know, you do look up. I think of Linda Thomas Greenfield, for example. I think of Ruth Davis. I mean, all these people. Carol Perez, the DG for me, is also very much in that field. People who kind of embody what I just talked about, like the, you know, the need to listen and to bring people together and to figure out, you know, what is the way that we can move forward together without dropping people off. But I think that probably the most influential mentor, I mean, if I can just say one person who kind of did sort of one sort of a thing, and I won't name names, but it was an ambassador who I had early on in my career, who in working with me saw something in me that I was not aware I had myself. I guess you could just call it potential. And at the time, I was like, oh my God, oh God, she's driving me crazy. She's throwing everything at me and all this kind of stuff, and I'm never going to be able to do it. But managed to, she knew I could do the things that she asked me to do. And I did them successfully. And then I looked, and it was super stressful. But when I look back, I think, that she pushed me in a way that made me use the resources that I had, that I wasn't aware that I had, that I was perhaps diffident about using. And that was very empowering. And so when I think of mentorship myself, to me, that's always a piece of it. It's not just, let me help you, let me connect you with that person. And it's also about drawing out of people what you can see they have, but they don't necessarily know yet that they have it. And like pushing them forward, not making them miserable and stressed out, but holding a high standard that then brings out what their potential is. I find that is in my head, that's a very useful way of framing what mentorship is. And one of the things actually that's so great about the State Department is that we do have a lot of, there's so much mentoring that goes on in terms of, there is this formal mentoring program, and you should, you can join, you can sign up, you can enroll, but there is so much that goes on that is not captured in those mechanisms. It's just people who remember their mentors and their champions and have the impact that people had, and then they try, as you say, to pay that forward. That's always been a big focus for me, is encouraging other people to reach their full potential, if you like. And it helps you as well, right? It helps you grow as you're helping other people. So it's very much a win-win formula.
Thank you to you, Mirembe. Excellent conversation. I learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And best of luck to all of you. It's going to be a bright future. I know it.
That was Diplomatic Immunity. Thanks for listening. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, and tell your friends and colleagues to come find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever they listen. Follow us on Twitter at GU Diplomacy, and visit our website isd.georgetown.edu.